5 young men vanished after a basketball game. Their car was found abandoned in the mountains, 70 miles from home. Months later, 4 were discovered dead in bizarre circumstances. Decades later, investigators still don't have the answers. This is the story of the Yuba County 5, America's strangest unsolved disappearance. Around town, people called them the boys. They weren't kids, though. All of them were in their mid-20s to early 30s, but they still lived at home, closely looked after by their families because of different intellectual or psychiatric conditions. Jack Madruga was 30, a quiet Army veteran who had worked as a dishwasher. His Mercury Montego was his pride, and his family swore he never let anyone else behind the wheel. His best friend, Bill Sterling, was 29. Bill was more outgoing, the kind of guy who loved talking and even read scripture to hospital patients. Then there was Ted Wire, 32. Friendly, but often a little absent-minded. His family laughed about the time he once blew $100 on pencils for no reason. Ted looked out for Jackie Hewitt, the youngest of the group at 24. Jackie had a speech impediment, couldn't read or write, and leaned on Ted for even simple things. The last of the 5 was Gary Mathias, 25. He didn't have an intellectual disability like the others, but he did suffer from schizophrenia. The Army had discharged him because of it. On his medication, though, Gary was stable. He played basketball, worked with his stepfather in gardening, and his doctors even called him a success story. Together, they made a tight-knit circle. Sports were their world. They played on a team called the Gateway Gators, part of a local program for people with disabilities. And the Gators had a big week ahead. On February 25th, they were supposed to start a Special Olympics tournament. A win could mean a free trip to Los Angeles. The boys were so excited they laid out their uniforms the night before and asked their parents to wake them early. But first, they wanted to catch another game. UC Davis playing Chico State. That's where everything began. Friday evening, Jack Madruga made the rounds, picking everyone up in his Montego. By 8 o'clock, they were in Chico, cheering in the stands. Witnesses said they seemed happy, perfectly normal. After the game, just before 10, they stopped at Bears Market before closing time. The clerk remembered them well. They loaded up on pies, candy bars, soda, even a quart of milk. Nothing unusual. But that was the last time anyone saw them alive. Instead of heading south toward home, Madruga's Montego turned east, into the mountains. No one knows why. The straightforward route would have been Highway 99, and then Highway 70. Instead, the car ended up on the Oroville, Quincy Highway, a twisting road into Plumas National Forest. By the next morning, the families were worried. None of the boys ever stayed out overnight. When they still hadn't come back, the police were called. 3 days later, a ranger reported seeing Madruga's Montego. It was sitting on a snow-covered mountain road, 70 miles from Chico. Deputies went out, and what they found was baffling. The car wasn't really stuck. The tires had spun, but 5 men could have pushed it free. The keys were missing, but when police hot-wired the ignition, the engine started right up. A quarter tank of gas remained. Even stranger, the undercarriage was spotless. No dents, no scrapes, not even on the low muffler. How had the car traveled miles of rough, potholed mountain road without a single mark? Madruga's family was adamant. He'd never driven up there before, and he would never let anyone else take the wheel. Inside, police found candy wrappers, milk cartons, and programs from the basketball game. The doors were unlocked. One window rolled down, again, out of character for Madruga. And outside the car? Nothing but dense, snow-choked wilderness. That same night, a 55-year-old man named Joseph Shones had been on that very road. He'd driven up in his Volkswagen to check snow conditions for a planned family trip. Around dusk, his car got stuck, and while pushing it, Shones suffered what he believed was a mild heart attack. Stranded, he kept the engine running for heat and lay inside, in pain. Hours later, sometime around 11 p.m., he saw headlights coming up the road. He claimed he saw a group of figures, men, and possibly a woman carrying a baby. When he called out for help, the lights went off and the people went silent. Later, he said he saw flashlights in the distance. Again, when he shouted, the lights vanished. By dawn, Shones felt well enough to walk 8 miles down to a lodge, where he got medical help. On the way, he passed the Mercury Montego, abandoned in the snow. At first, he didn't think much of it. Only later, when the news broke, did he realize he may have seen the Yuba County 5 that night. But the details of his account shifted over time. Sometimes he said he saw 2 cars, including a pickup truck. Sometimes he admitted he might have hallucinated parts of it due to the pain and stress of his condition. Still, his story remains the only eyewitness account placing others near the Montego that night. When authorities found the Montego on February 28th, they launched a search. Helicopters scanned the mountains, deputies rode horses and snowmobiles, and volunteers combed the forests. But the terrain was brutal. 4,400 feet up in the Sierra Nevadas, blanketed with snow. At one point, a searcher suffered a heart attack, another caught pneumonia. After a heavy snowstorm dumped 9 inches, the search had to be called off. For months, there was no sign of the 5 men. Their families were desperate. Some even consulted psychics. But until the spring thaw, the mountains kept their secrets. It wasn't until June 1978 that answers began to emerge. A group of motorcyclists exploring the area stumbled upon a Forest Service trailer near Bucks Lake, about 19 miles from where the Montego had been found. The front window was broken, and the smell of decay hit them immediately. Inside, on a bed, lay the body of Ted Wire. He was wrapped in 8 sheets, his shoes missing, his feet badly frostbitten and partially gangrenous. He had lost nearly 100 pounds, and his beard growth suggested he had survived up to 3 months after the disappearance. But here's the strangest part. The trailer had resources that could have kept all 5 men alive for weeks, even months. There were matches and books that could have been used for kindling, but no fire had ever been lit. Heavy forestry clothing was untouched in a closet. A butane tank outside could have powered heat and light if its valve had been turned. And in a nearby storage shed, unopened containers of dehydrated food sat untouched, enough to last a year. 12 cans of sea rations had been opened, apparently with a P-38 can opener, the kind issued in the military. Of the group, only Madruga and Matthias would have known how to use one. Why didn't they use the supplies? Why didn't they light a fire? And who had covered Wire's body so carefully with sheets, when he would have been too weak and frostbitten to do it himself? The discovery of Wire reignited the search. Within days, investigators found more remains. About 11 miles from the Montego, on opposite sides of a road, lay the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Both had died of hypothermia. Animals had partially consumed Madruga, while Sterling's bones were scattered across the area. 2 days later, searchers found the remains of Jackie Hewitt, first his spine, then his skull, identified through dental records. Like the others, his death was ruled hypothermia. But one man, Gary Matthias, was gone. His sneakers were left behind in the trailer, and investigators suspected he had borrowed Wire's shoes to venture out. Beyond that, Gary vanished without a trace. And that's where this case shifts from tragic to terrifying. When the snow melted in June of 1978, 4 bodies had been found scattered across the Sierra Nevada mountains. Ted Wire starved to death in a trailer stocked with untouched food and fuel. Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling froze halfway between the car and the trailer. Jackie Hewitt died in the woods nearby. The scene left investigators with more questions than answers. Why had the men ignored survival supplies? Why didn't they build a fire? Why had they trekked 19 miles through deep snow instead of simply going back down the road towards safety? The car itself raised suspicion. It was found 70 miles off course, far from any logical route home. Its undercarriage was spotless, despite a bumpy, rutted mountain road. Whoever drove it handled it with unusual skill. Was it Madruga, as his family insisted, or someone else entirely? Inside the trailer, Wire's body had been wrapped in 8 sheets. His mother said Ted couldn't even fold his own bedclothes neatly, so who'd carefully tucked him in? On the table beside him was a gold watch that didn't belong to any of the 5 men. To this day, no one knows whose it was. And then there were the shoes. Wire's were gone. Matthias's sneakers were there. If Gary really took Ted's shoes to leave, why hasn't a single trace of him been found, despite decades of searching? The second came from a store clerk in Brownsville, about 30 miles from the car. On March 3rd, a week after the disappearance, she claimed 4 men came in a red pickup truck. She described them as having big eyes and unusual expressions. She identified them as members of the group, Hewitt and Sterling, at a phone booth, with Wire and possibly Madruga buying food inside. The store owner backed her up, describing Wire grabbing chocolate milk and burritos, which matched his habits. The families were split. Some said it didn't fit the boys' personalities to be in Brownsville, but the clerk was considered credible. Was it really them? Or 4 other men who just happened to look similar? If there's one figure who dominates the theories, it's Gary Mathias. Gary's background was complicated. During his army service in Germany, he developed drug problems and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was discharged and returned home to Marysville. For years he had violent outbursts, sometimes arrested, sometimes hospitalized. But by 1978, doctors described him as a sterling success case, thanks to medication. He was close friends with the others, but his family admitted he sometimes resisted his medications. Without them, he could spiral into paranoia or delusions. Some believe Gary may have led the group up the mountain during a psychotic break. Others argue he was as vulnerable as the rest, and perhaps the only one resourceful enough to try for help after the others collapsed. But with Gary, one haunting fact remains. He disappeared entirely. If he died in the snow, searchers should have found remains, just like they did with the others. Decades later, nothing has turned up. Over the years, the case has spawned countless theories. The simplest theory is that they accidentally drove onto Oroville Quincy Road while heading home. Maybe they planned to visit Gary's friends in Forbestown, a nearby town. But why keep driving deeper into the mountains, in the dark, wearing only light jackets? Investigators later noted that a Forest Service snowcat had cleared the road the day before. It's possible the men followed the vehicle's tracks, believing it led to shelter. That would explain their 19-mile trek to the trailer. But it doesn't explain why they ignored the supplies once inside. Some point to reports of strange characters in the area, or military activity nearby. Could the men have been forced off course, or chased? The missing gold watch and Mathias's disappearance fuel this angle. Another theory is that Gary Mathias had a schizophrenic episode, and convinced the others to follow him into the wilderness. With limited reasoning skills, the group might have complied. But this paints Gary as the villain, which his family fiercely disputes. Some suggest the men broke into the trailer, but didn't touch supplies out of fear of being arrested for theft. To them, staying cold and hungry might have felt safer than getting in trouble. It seems illogical, but with their cognitive challenges, it's not impossible. Each theory explains some parts of the puzzle, but none explain all of it. When the bodies were recovered in 1978, grief rippled through Yuba City. Families were shattered. Bill Sterling's father said, "Those boys wouldn't have just gone up there. Someone made them do it." And the one person who might have held the answers, Gary Mathias, remains missing more than 4 decades later. Even today, the site of the Montego's discovery draws curious visitors. People still comb through the forest near Bucks Lake, wondering if somewhere, hidden under the pines, lies Gary's body, or the truth of what happened that night. The Yuba County 5 has been called America's Dyatlov Pass. Like the Russian hikers, the story involves ordinary people, a remote wilderness, bizarre behavior, and deaths that don't make sense. Why abandon a working car? Why walk miles into the snow? Why ignore life-saving supplies? Why cover Ted Wire so carefully? And what became of Gary Mathias? 5 friends set out to watch a basketball game. By morning, they had vanished. 4 were found dead in strange and haunting circumstances. 1 remains missing to this day. Nearly half a century later, the case still defies explanation. So what do you think happened to the Yuba County 5? Was it a tragic accident, a psychotic break, or something far darker?